Good afternoon, this is Daniel here with Cop Watch TV. Just wanted to welcome everyone to our live event. So what we're going to do today is essentially go over some of the most important issues in policing and some of the most interesting cases from the last couple weeks. We typically do this every Friday where there's a live event, and it's a really good thing because we interact with the audience and the viewers, and we take questions and comments. So if you have any of those while we're going through, definitely put them in the chat, and so we can interact and discuss things. Again, my name is Daniel, and you can follow me over at Police Law News. And we typically do this every Friday at 2 p.m. Mountain Time. We did take a couple weeks off for the holiday, but we are back, and we're going to be doing this every Friday. So make sure that you like and subscribe to the Cop Watch TV channel so you know exactly when we are going to be live on doing these events, but it's typically going to be every Friday. So like I said, any questions, comments about what we're talking about, please put it in the chat so we can address it. And if you have a super chat as well, we would love to hear super chats as well, and we do have something special for when we get that. So let's get into the cases. So the first case that we want to talk about, and that's happened the last couple weeks, that the media is talking about and the news is talking about, one of the most important things to break down is the Jalen Walker case. So this is a case that occurred on 6/27 of this year in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I know it seems like we just have a lot of these officer-involved shootings that are controversial for one reason or another that happen in this area, which is strange. So I went to law school in the Twin Cities. I went to school in St. Paul, and I graduated there in 2019, but I remember it being a pretty nice place, a reasonable place. And it seems like as soon as I left, all of these shootings happened, and there's a lot going on there, and this happens to be one of them. So a quick rundown of the facts of the Jalen Walker case is what happened is Jalen was driving a vehicle. I believe his registration was expired, and a police officer tried to stop him, and he didn't stop. And when he didn't stop, the police officer didn't chase him anymore, so it was called off. A little while later, pretty late into the night, I think around 1 o'clock in the morning, he was driving again, and another police officer tried to stop him. Well, this time, the police officer, while he was, behind Jalen, and within about 40 seconds of the traffic stop initiating, Jalen fired a round from the vehicle out of the driver's side window. Now, it isn't known if he fired it at the police officer or just in the air, but you can imagine a situation where a police officer is behind someone and they are just trying to do a traffic stop, and that's all they think it is, and maybe the vehicle isn't stopping, and then the individual fires a gun. So that escalates things to a pretty extreme rate, and that goes from a traffic stop for just a regular violation that police officers just, aren't going to chase for, to something where you pretty much put police officers in a position where they almost have to chase, and they also almost have to do a vehicle pursuit. So eventually, the officer calls us out on the radio, and the cavalry comes. So eventually, Jalen's car stops, and police officers on the driver's side, it's kind of cars going at a more residential neighborhood at a slow speed, and police officers go on the driver's side door. They go on the driver's side in the vehicle, and they try to box in and block him from the driver's side to kind of contain him in the vehicle. But while the car is still running, he does something unexpected. And whenever there's a police chase, there's a lot of things that happen that are unexpected. So what happens is that he goes out the passenger side and he starts to run from police. Almost immediately, police engage in a foot chase, and two different officers utilize tasers. And the tasers aren't effective. And it's important to note that tasers fail approximately 40% of the time for one reason or another. They just don't have the desired effect. But this is what happened here. The tasers didn't work. But the reason why this is important, because it shows that the intention from the police officers was to end this situation and to get Jalen into custody without having to use lethal force. So tasers is what they wanted to do. So he pretty much ran, and as he was running, he turned around towards officers. That's when he was tased. The tasers didn't work. Then he ran again. Once he was running again, he again turned around towards police officers, only this time he did something a little different. As Jalen turned around, he put his hands near his waist, and he made a quick motion towards the officers as he turned around. At that point, police officers were involved in an officer-involved shooting. Now, was found out later that Jalen wasn't armed. He had left the gun and also his wedding ring in the vehicle. He didn't take it with him. So, but at the time of the shooting, I think it's reasonable to say that because he had fired a gun, so officers knew that he was armed at one point because he had fired a gun out of the car, and when he turned quickly towards the officers, that it was reasonable for them to think, especially because his hands were near his waist, that he was drawing a firearm. That would be a reasonable assumption for the police officers to think. Now, a couple things can be true. I think it's reasonable to say that the initial deadly force used by the police officers was lawful and justified. However, the police officers, I believe there were 8 officers, they shot 90 times. Of the 90 times they shot, he was shot 46 times. And the body camera footage is pretty horrific. And if you watch the body camera footage after Jalen is on the ground, where it doesn't seem like he's a threat anymore, police officers are still firing rounds. So you have to ask yourself the question, well, is it just because if the initial officer involved shooting, if that was reasonable and legal and justified, well, what if they fired 20, 30, 40, 50 shots too many? What is that? Is that a violation of law? And it probably isn't, because if deadly force is authorized or justified to use deadly force, then it doesn't matter really if police officers shoot 4 times or 20 times. Now, it could be a violation of police department policy. So I think that's what the officers could be facing. But when it comes to criminal charges for the police officers, I think it is much more relevant of why the police officers shot in the first place than how many shots they actually fired. And they did release some of the information about the police officers involved, and most of them were pretty young police officers. They had on 1 year to 3 years. I think the senior person on scene had on 7 years. So when you have police departments where there aren't a lot of senior officers, and you have newer officers who maybe aren't accustomed to or used to being under stressful scenarios and situations like this is one of the things that might happen, is that they might shoot more than maybe a senior officer might have. One other question that came out, so we're going to follow this case and we'll see if the officers are prosecuted. One of the questions that came out of this and that officers were criticized for, it was on all the major news networks right after this happened, is after Jalen Walker was shot, the police officers handcuffed him. So people who didn't know, who don't have any experience, police training, they don't have any real knowledge about this. Instead of asking the question, which is, if you don't know something, that's what you should do. I don't know anything about auto mechanics, or I don't know how to be a brain surgeon. So before I criticize a brain surgeon, I'm probably going to ask them, why do you do this? So that should have been the question from a lot of these news networks. Why did the police officers handcuff Jalen Walker after he was shot? And it's pretty much standard practice and procedure all around the country that this is what police officers do after an officer-involved shooting. And there's a couple reasons why. The first reason is that after an officer-involved shooting, you have an individual who is injured. So the priority should be to get the person immediate medical help, to render aid and to try to save the person's life as quickly as possible. That should be what the police officers want to do. Now, if a police officer is shooting at people, typically it's because the individual posed a deadly threat. So police officers, for reasonable officer safety reasons, should not underestimate the intention or the ability of people who just fired at them or who just posed some type of a deadly threat. So to handcuff the individual basically just makes it safer for the individual or the police officer. Because a worst case scenario would be after an individual shot, if police officers run up and try to render aid, as they should try to render aid as quickly as possible with chest seals or tourniquets or whatever else the individual might need, what if there is a gun that's near the person or a knife that's near the person? Now, when a police officer is under that much stress, what you don't want is for the police officer to think the individual is reaching for the gun again or for the knife again. Not even talking about if the individual actually does reach for those things, but you don't want a police officer to confuse someone who's injured and may not know exactly what movements their arms are making because they've been shot. You don't want a police officer to mistake that for trying to reach for the gun or the knife again, because then what happens in a situation if the police officers use more force? So you want to limit that. So those are the reasons why people are handcuffed after they are shot. It's pretty much best practices for police departments all around the country. And not every situation is the same, but having that as a general rule with the idea that saving the person's life is the goal at this point, and this is a way to accomplish that safely. I think that is pretty reasonable. So again, if anybody has any other questions about that, put it in the chat. This is a case that I expect to be in the news for a long time. And I'm sorry, I think I said that this was in Minneapolis. This was actually in Akron, Ohio. But there's another case in a little while in Minneapolis. So this case was in Akron, Ohio, and afterwards there are protests and there were demonstrations all around the city that were going on in Akron right after this happened. So that's that case. So if you have any questions or comments, definitely put it in there. We'll see what people think about this case, or if you have any other information about it. And I think it's reasonable to think that this was probably a suicide by cop situation with Jalen Walker, because think about it. A lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time, when there's an officer-involved shooting, when someone runs from police and then they fire a gun and then they run on foot from police, a lot of times you can look at someone's criminal history and you could see, okay, that makes sense. That isn't the case with Jalen Walker. By all accounts, he was just a regular, normal person. He wasn't a criminal, didn't have warrants. He didn't just commit a crime. So there was no reason for him to do this. Now, he did just lose his fiance very recently before this, and family members in the media had said that he did seem depressed. He also left his wedding ring in the car too. So if you look at what he did, is the first time the police officers tried to stop him, once he didn't stop, they just let him go. So he escalated it and he fired a gun the next time. The same thing when he was running on foot. He was running on foot and he turned around, and I think that he thought he was going to be shot right then, but that's not what happened. The officers utilized tasers. So the second time he turned around, he again escalated it. He moved his hands near his waist and he made a quick motion towards the police officers. So to me, and because of the lack of criminal history, he didn't have warrants, he didn't just commit a felony. Because of all of these things, the totality of the circumstances, also he left his gun in the car and his wedding ring in the car. So it seemed like this is very likely a suicide by cop situation, which is very sad, but that's what it looks like. So I know we talk about Uvalde a lot, and anyone who talks about these kinds of police issues, almost everyone has the same take. And so it just isn't that interesting, and that's, especially since all the body cam footage has come out, is the officer should have gone in. Okay, fine. Everybody agrees with that. But there is a question that I was asked on my TikTok earlier this week where someone asked, should the police officers in Uvalde be fired? Now, I think that's an interesting question because it's a little more nuanced. So based on the body camera footage and the report that we got from Alert, one of the reports that came out about it, I think that's a reasonable question that we might be able to dive into a little bit. And what that is since I don't know the employment laws in Texas or the SOPs in Texas, I think instead of saying should the Uvalde officers be fired, I think it's a better question, but kind of in the same vein, to ask, did the officers perform their job, reasonably well? So they're going to be in 3 different tiers, I think is a good way to think about it. So the first tier is going to be the leaders. So the police leaders, the chief of police, Chief Arredondo, who was on scene, and the police leaders from the other agencies who were there on scene, who were pretty much setting the tone and directing what the officer should do. So they didn't do a good job. I don't think anybody has any heartache if those individuals are never police officers again. So I think that's pretty clear cut that there was poor leadership and planning, which definitely goes on the leaders who were there on scene. Then the next tier is the officers who were outside. And I know it's a bad look because the officers who were outside of the school, they were stopping parents from coming in. And I get it, that looks terrible. But you have to think about it this way. The officers who were outside the school, here's what they knew. They knew that there was an active shooter inside the school and that there were at least 20 cops inside the school. They didn't have a live feed or a camera. They had no idea exactly what was going on in there, only that there were 20 cops inside the school dealing with an active shooter. Now, standard police procedure, and it's a good procedure, is when there's an active shooter, whether it be at a school or at a grocery store, is that police officers set up a perimeter and they make sure that nobody else goes into the scene of the active shooter. I mean, this seems like a good practice. And that's what the officers did here. And again, it looks bad when it's a school shooting, when officers inside aren't doing a good job and parents are trying to get in. So, of course, that doesn't look good, but can you imagine if the police officers did allow 20, 30, 40, 85 parents to go into the school? Or in another active shooter scene, could you imagine 20, 30, or 40 of random people running into the scene of an active shooter? What if a police officer mistakes one of the individuals for someone who's an active shooter? That can't possibly make anything better. So the officers who were securing the perimeter outside the school, they did exactly what they were supposed to do, and they should not be terminated or anything like that. Then it comes to the officers who were inside the school. So if you were one of the first officers on scene who were inside the school for 77 minutes, and if you weren't asking Pete Arredondo and the other leaders questions, yeah, that's probably going to fall on the side of you weren't doing a good job. But if you were like the BORTAC team from Border Patrol, who got there later on, and pretty much once they figured out what was going on, they entered and they ended the situation, they killed this guy, well, that would be a different thing. So I think it depends about how long you were there and the information that you had, and I think that's how those individuals should be judged. I know I mentioned Pete Arredondo, so he was essentially, he resigned from the city council. When it comes to his Uvalde Public School District chief of police job, he was put on admin leave a couple weeks ago, which is a good thing. And the school board, the people who are in charge, are going to have a special meeting tomorrow on a Saturday, and they are going to decide whether or not he's going to be terminated from his position. So I think a lot of people are hoping that he is, and it would probably be better for the community if he is not in any kind of position of power. So that's kind of the update on Uvalde. Like I said, they have released a lot of the body cam footage. One of the most horrifying things, I mean, besides all of the death, is the police officer Ruiz, who got the call from his wife, Eva Morales, who was a teacher at the school. He got a call that she was, from her, that she was shot and that she was possibly dying. And you can see they've released the body cam footage where he basically just gets off the phone with her and he tells the other officers there that he says she's shot. And he tries to walk through the line of police officers to get there, and they stop him. And that is a heartbreaking scene, but that is on body camera that has been made publicly available. The next story, so if anybody has any questions or comments, definitely open it up to see if anybody wants to discuss anything on the Uvalde case. So someone had a comment, let's see, they should, SMCG, they should fire all the cops and even the mayor. I've never seen someone dodge as many questions and say nothing when he speaks. Yeah, so when it comes to the mayor, so the mayor is a little defensive when it comes to this. At first, the mayor was irritated that any body camera or surveillance footage was available at all. And then it was the mayor's decision to release at least the city body camera footage that we have. So he felt that what was initially released, more so the surveillance video, didn't accurately depict what happened. Let's see. Okay, GS38, a friend of mine was killed in the line of duty last night. So I'm sorry to hear that. I heard that there was an officer-involved shooting, or that an officer was killed in Rochester, New York, and I am sorry for your loss. Sorry for your loss. All right, the next story that we're going to go to is it's in Greenwood, Indiana. This happened last week, and it's essentially it's a good guy with a gun. That's the kind of case this is. So there was an active shooter at a mall in Greenwood, Indiana, and the active shooter, he was a 20-year-old. He brought two guns in. I think he brought a rifle and a handgun in, hit over 100 rounds of ammo, and he started shooting in the mall. In 2 minutes, he fired 20 rounds, and he killed 3 people, and he injured 3 more. Within 2 minutes of the shooting started, there was a man named Elijah Dickin, a 22-year-old who was a concealed carry holder who engaged the active shooter. So within 2 minutes of it happening, he fired 10 rounds at the active shooter. Of the 10 rounds, from 40 yards away, he hit him 8 times and ended the active shooter at that point. Since the bad guy had over 100 rounds and he only shot 20 rounds, had Elijah not gotten involved, it's reasonable to say that 10, 15, or 20 people could have died and that many more injured as well. So he is a hero. The chief of police and the mayor went on TV publicly and said that this individual is a hero. And of course, there's some blowback coming from this because he was carrying a gun. And the mall has a policy that they are a gun-free zone. So even on CNN, people were asking questions such as, well, is he going to be prosecuted for bringing a gun into a gun-free zone? And that's fine if you have that question. I would rather have people ask questions if they don't know. But on some of these major networks, I mean, what they should be explaining is that is a policy. A gun-free zone inside a mall is a policy. And you know what? The mall has a lot of policies. You also can't run up the escalator backwards, okay? There's a lot of policies, but it's not a law. Now, there are state laws in most states saying that you can't bring a gun into a liquor store or into an establishment or into a bar. So there definitely aren't. There definitely are laws like that. Skateboarding. You can't skateboard inside the mall. You probably can't jump on a pogo stick inside the mall. So this is a policy that the mall has. So worst case scenario, if someone at the mall had seen that Mr. Dickin was carrying a gun inside the mall, they could contact him and they could ask him to leave for violating the policy. And if he didn't leave, then it's possible that a police officer could give him a criminal trespass notice for violating mall policy. So there's nothing he did that was illegal. And I think that's important to note. Also, we have from SMCG, we have a comment. 40 yards is super far. He could have easily missed and died doing what he did. Yeah, 100%. 40 yards is super far. A lot of police officers in a lot of states are only required to practice with their handguns from 25 yards out. So to be able to shoot, and I believe in an interview he said that he learned from his grandfather. So to be an accurate shot at 40 yards, again, under a situation that is extremely stressful, it's extremely amazing human performance right there. And he is a hero, and he probably saved a lot of lives. And a lot of the podcasts I listen to and books that I read, so one of the books that I'm reading right now about halfway through, it's called The End of Policing by Alex Vitale, and it's actually terrible. You shouldn't read it at all. But I mean, he makes a lot of he makes a lot of things where he talks about issues like this, and it's all anti-police stuff, and it isn't honest at all. But he talks about a lot of how, the hero with a gun, the good guy with a gun, how that's a myth. And there's been a lot of articles from Salon and Slate and the Huffington Post over the last several years with that exact headline: the good guy with a gun is a myth. So, after this happened, I did some research on it, and there's a website called crimeresearch.org, which actually tracks and studies a lot of this stuff. So what crimeresearch.org was able to find is that in the last year, there have been 10 incidents where a good guy with a gun was able to stop an active shooter. And since 2020, there have been 21 instances where a good guy with a gun has stopped an active shooter. So almost, 1 to 1.5 every month. But this is one of the only ones that we actually hear about. So it's interesting what they decide to cover and what they don't. And I guess what my point is, it's not that a good guy with a gun, it's not that that idea is a myth. It's just that there aren't enough good guys with guns. Because I think we would all prefer this outcome of, we don't want anyone to get shot, but we would rather, if there's an active shooter, we would rather have them shoot for 2 minutes and then be killed instead of being able to shoot for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. And I just want to point out that if you are one of the people, like me, who is criticizing the police officers in Uvalde, Texas, so if you criticize the police officers' performance there, which essentially goes along the lines of, we can't trust the police officers, they're not going to protect us when we need them, those are reasonable criticisms that I have as well as those police officers. So if you're going to make that criticism of police officers in Uvalde, then you shouldn't also be making the same argument that reasonable people who passed a background check, who are trained, should not have a concealed carry gun. That doesn't make sense. They've done studies on concealed carry holders and concealed carry holders. If you are going to go through the background check and the training in order to get a concealed carry, that those individuals, their incidence of committing crime are extremely low. It's even lower than law enforcement, people in law enforcement. So the idea that we don't want people to do this, I don't think is a correct idea, because we see what good can happen. So if anybody has any questions about that case, we definitely like to hear about it. Let's see what we got in here. Jeff Meek said, "Can't we just require all law-abiding adults to carry guns? I bet them could potentially end their spree early. They'd reconsider." Well, we can't require anything, which is great about this country. So we can't require them to carry guns, but we should encourage. So the encouragement shouldn't be, from the media and from the government. It shouldn't be, well, the good guy with a gun. It's a myth. It never happens. It's not a thing. Guns do far more harm than good. So that's the narrative. That's the agenda. But it shouldn't be. So stories like this should be pointed out. And no, just random people who've never picked up a gun and have no education or training, those aren't the kinds of people that, probably should be doing this. But if you're going to take the effort and time to get trained and get licensed and go through the background check for a concealed carry, yeah, absolutely, those are the kinds of people. And yes, if bad guys know that there are people who are armed there, that they would likely be less likely to engage in this kind of activity. Because if you notice, where do most of these mass shootings happen? These active shooters happen. They happen in gun-free zones. They happen in schools, in malls. Gun-free zones is where they happen. But the thing about a gun-free zone is that there's no force field around the school that doesn't let you, around the mall that doesn't let you in if you happen to be carrying a firearm. James Eccles says, "I carry a firearm on me and I'm just security guard for various businesses and clients." Yeah, that's reasonable, and I'm sure your clients appreciate that. I'm sure that they appreciate that for sure. So if anybody has any comments about that, definitely put it in so we can talk about that. Admittedly, I don't watch a whole lot of TV unless it's the Seinfeld or sports. Or news. I really don't watch a whole lot of TV, but we did just watch Yellowstone. So I don't know how many people have watched Yellowstone, but it's a pretty good show. It's essentially like Sons of Anarchy for people who live in Montana. But for those who've watched it, like this Monica lady, the girl who's married to Casey, I mean, is she just like the Meghan Markle of Yellowstone? I don't know. I just think just shut up and live on the ranch. Next, we've got Techley Sundberg. So this is a case that just happened, and they just released the body cam video in the last day or so, Techley Sundberg. So this is the case that happened in Minneapolis. And the interesting thing about the Techley Sundberg case, so he was a young black male who was killed by police officers. This was in Minneapolis, the same city where the George Floyd incident happened, and very, very close to where Kim Potter had her shooting, which was in Brooklyn Center, which is very close. So a lot of incidents have been happening in the Minneapolis metro area. And so Techley Sundberg. So what happened in that case is that there's a woman who lives across the hall from Techley Sundberg. Her name is Arabelle Yarborough, and she says that he had a crush on her and that he was kind of stalking her. So this happened on 7/13. So she said that on 7/13 that he went into the hallway and he started to shoot a gun at her front door. And there's bullet holes in the front door. She said that she was home with her two small children and that she was cooking. So she said that while she was cooking that she started taking fire. She calls police officers. Police officers get there on scene and they are able to rescue her and her kids. Officers then get into a standoff with Techley. So he's not cooperating. He's not coming out. They get into a 6-hour standoff with him in this apartment complex. So not only is he shooting at police officers during the 6 hours, he's also firing randomly in and around the apartment complex, which still has people in it because not everyone was able to be evacuated. So this is what happens. Then at some point after about 6 hours, a sniper with the police department does shoot Techley and kill him. And this is before a lot of this information came out. So the exact reason why there was an officer-involved shooting, like the next day, people didn't have a whole lot of information. However, Black Lives Matter and other protesters went to the apartment complex the next day. And they started to protest and yelling about police brutality and stuff like that. And I think being able to protest is an incredible right. It's a First Amendment right. Everybody should be able to do it. But I think you should really know what you're protesting. So they essentially went out there and were protesting, having no idea of what Techley did to get shot or that he was firing at police officers, with no information like that, just protesting just to protest, which seems strange. You should know what you're protesting about. But the interesting thing that happened is that Arabelle Yarborough, the victim of Techley, she came out and confronted protesters, and it's all on video. It's really interesting because she got in their faces and she was not quiet about it. She said things to the effect of, he was armed, he was trying to kill us. And you can see that these protesters, like, they really didn't know what to say because they just didn't have that information. And then she made a point that I think is incredibly smart and intelligent, and it's something that I've been saying for years and a lot of people have been saying for years. But because she's a victim of violent crime, maybe someone will listen to her. And she said, this isn't George Floyd. This isn't Jacob Blake. This isn't Tamir Rice. She said he was armed and he was trying to kill us. And so just the idea that all of these officer-involved shootings, they're all different. So I think most of us can look at the George Floyd case and say, what Derek Chauvin did, that was excessive. That was criminal. We're good with Derek Chauvin being in prison for 22 years. No problem with that. That's not the case with Jacob Blake. Jacob Blake was reaching for a knife as police officers shot him. So, I mean, whether or not you think it's justified, these are different situations. And what a lot of people do, they say, anytime someone is killed by the police, if they say they lump all of these cases together. And that does a couple things. That makes all the police officers look bad, which isn't fair, because we should call out the police officers who do commit crimes and not the ones who don't commit crimes. But it also lumps all of the victims together. So, and I don't think that is fair to the victims who are true victims of when police officers violate the law. So I think that was a great point that she made, and I am absolutely 100% glad that she said it. Yeah, that's about it on that case. Let's see, do we have any comments on any of these cases that we just went through? Okay, so Joe says that George Floyd had a drug overdose. So let's talk about that for a second. So yeah, so at the time that George Floyd, when they did the autopsy, my understanding is that he had 3 times the fatal dose of fentanyl in his system. Now, when they talk about the fatal dose, that means a normal person. So I have about 1 beer a week and I've never had fentanyl. So a tiny bit of fentanyl would probably just about do it for me. Okay, so the fatal dose is for what would kill an average person. But George Floyd, well, he wasn't an average fentanyl user. He used a lot of fentanyl. So what would be fatal for me would definitely not be fatal for George Floyd. So did he have a lot of fentanyl in his system? Absolutely, 100%, 3 times the typical average fatal dose. Would it have killed him? But for Derek Chauvin, I don't know. And I think it was definitely a factor. He also just had COVID and he had heart issues as well. So all of those things came about. But if you look at the force that Chauvin used, it was excessive force. It was not necessary. It was not reasonable. It was not proportional. And under those situations of using excessive force, someone died. So Derek Chauvin being convicted, I don't think most people don't have any issues with that, because it absolutely was excessive force that was not necessary and someone died. Now, one other thing. So Thomas Lane, he was a police officer who I think there were 4 officers on scene for George Floyd. Thomas Lane, he had on, I think it was his 3rd shift as a police officer. And I think he was the least culpable person there, meaning that, so it was Derek Chauvin, it was another officer, Lueng, L-U-E-N-G, was in the middle of George Floyd, kind of holding his back, and then Lane was at the back. So Lane was holding George Floyd's legs. So and there was an officer in between him and Chauvin. So it's reasonable to think that. He didn't see what was going on. And even though it was his third day, he did ask Chauvin twice, hey, should we roll him over? Should we roll him over? But Thomas Lane was just sentenced in federal court for deprivation of civil rights. He was just sentenced to 2.5 years in jail. So to me, that seems excessive. The same thing for Tao. Tao was the officer who was doing crowd control. He never touched George Floyd. And maybe if there wasn't a crowd of 10, 15, 20 people screaming at them, maybe he would have been able to see what was going on with the 3 other officers. But I think those 2 were probably the least culpable, but I've heard that Tao is looking at maybe somewhere between 5 to 6 years in prison. Okay, so let's see if we have it. That was a good conversation about the George Floyd case. Let's see. Jeff Meeks asked, what do you think about Ethan Crumbley's parents getting charged? So from what I know about that case, and I haven't done a deep dive on that case, but essentially I believe that Ethan Crumbley, he was a school shooter, and he had contact with his parents, I believe text messages with his mother not long before. I don't know if they knew he had a firearm, but both the parents are being charged and are kind of strange. So I think if and I don't know what the laws are in that state, but if the parents had a reasonable knowledge and they gave the ability for him to bring a gun to school, then I think I don't have any issue with them being charged. I'm not sure exactly what they're charged with, but if they made it so Ethan could have access to a gun and didn't do anything for the warning signs, they being charged with something to the effect of creating a situation that's dangerous that would lead a reasonable person to believe that something bad could happen, for lack of a better term. So if that's the type of crime that they're charged with, I think that's probably about right. So I don't think we have any issue with the parents being charged, but more facts will come out on that. Let's see. Yeah, Jeff. Okay, so the parents bought the gun, but says it was locked up, seemed to have ignored warning. Yeah, exactly. So they purchased the gun. However they purchased it, they let him have access to it somehow and ignored multiple warning signs. So I don't think anybody has any issue with the parents being charged there. Judge Clark said they found $20 not counterfeit. You must have missed that fact. Let's see. I think that's in reference to the George Floyd case where he was trying to pass a counterfeit. There was a report that he was passing a counterfeit $20 bill or something. Yeah, I'm not too sure on that. Let's see. So based YT, you are full of. I like this one. Chauvin had nothing to do with Floyd had nothing to do with St. Floyd's martyrdom. The state's own use of force SME acknowledged he used minimal force. Did you watch the trial? I did watch the trial, and I guess it's okay for us to disagree. But what I will say is I think you're making 2 different arguments. I think one might be a good argument and one is a bad argument. So your good argument is that the state SME said that they didn't use the word minimal in that training. I think they used that this was in some training somewhere. But if you look at what that training said, the officer is not supposed to put the weight on the individual's neck. If anything, the weight is supposed to go on the back, not on the neck. And you can clearly see from the video that that's where it was. Now, when police officers are in use of force situations, they don't always do everything as they're trained perfectly. But so that was in training. But you also said that Chauvin had nothing to do with it. Well, he had something to do with it, okay? He had something to do with it. To say he had nothing to do with it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But to say that the tactic that was used was trained, yeah, it was trained. Now, is it possible for a trained tactic to be used in an excessive manner from police officers? Yes, of course. So I don't have any issues with Derek Chauvin being charged and convicted. I think that's exactly where he belongs. I do have an issue with the other 3 officers being charged and convicted. So that is where my issue is with that case, but not with Chauvin. 0 sympathy from me on that one. Let's see. Okay, so the last case that I want to talk about is the bodega worker, or the Bodega worker, as the greatest doctor of our time, Dr. Joe Biden says. At the Bodega, Jose Alba. So Jose Alba is 61 years old. He works at a bodega in New York. He actually immigrated to the United States 30 years ago from the Dominican Republic, and he doesn't have any kind of criminal history. And we got a super chat, so that is exciting. So let's stop real quick, and I'll get back in that, and let's read that. Oh, okay. All right. So I thought we had a super chat. So this is what's going to happen. See how exciting this is? This is what's going to happen if we get a super chat. So, but yeah, this is what we're going to do. So, sorry, I was a little confused. But anyways, okay. So the bodega worker Jose Alba, he doesn't have any type of criminal history. And what happened with this case is that a woman came into the store and she tried to buy some chips. Her card didn't work, and apparently and what she alleges that her 10-year-old daughter was holding the chips. And she said that when the card failed, that the worker behind the counter, Jose Alba, that he rudely grabbed the chips and snatched the chips from her. She said she's going to go and tell her man. That's exactly what she did. She went back home and she got her ex-boyfriend, Austin Simon, who Austin is, at the time, he was 35 years old. And, unlike Jalen Walker, Austin Simon is a career criminal. He has robbery convictions, and he is, is that a super chat? And we got a super chat, SMCG. Thank you. Your coworker set you up. Yeah, he got me. Thank you so much, SMCG. I appreciate all the comments and all the interaction, and I did get owned. That was funny. Thank you so much. So Jose Alba. So Austin Simon, 35 years old. He was actually on probation for battery on a police officer when this happens. So she goes back and she basically tells him what happened there. Now, I have a 7-year-old and a 12-year-old, and if I heard this story that a worker at a store snatched chips out of my kid's hand, as a parent, I might be kind of irritated. So that isn't unreasonable that Austin Simon is irritated. It's also not that unreasonable that he went back down. Like, I could see a lot of parents going back down and asking the individual behind the counter, hey, what happened? You don't have to be that rude. Or turning into a Karen and asking for the phone number for the manager. So I could see a normal, reasonable parent doing that. But that's not how Austin rolls. So he did something that was a little unreasonable. He not only screamed and yelled in the store, but he went behind the counter. And he essentially cornered Jose Alba into a corner behind the counter. He pushed him down, he battered him. And where Jose was, he wasn't able to leave. And Austin Simon was pretty much towering over him. And in that situation, that could be considered, because his movement was restricted, that could be considered kidnapping, or holding against your will. I can't think of the name for it. Anyways, but it could be kidnapping or something similar to kidnapping, and he was battered during that. So really, that's at least 2 felony crimes that likely happened. So during this, Jose Alba was able to grab, at first they said it was a knife. It's hard to tell on the surveillance video if it's a letter opener, but some type of a sharp object. We'll just call it a knife for argument's sake. And during this, he stabbed Austin Simon in the neck, and he killed him. Most people watching the surveillance video would say, yeah, no, don't want anyone to die, but this was reasonable self-defense. You have an aggressive person who's 30 years younger, who is upset, who is battering and is restricting the movement of someone. This is a reasonable use of force or a self-defense for Jose Alba. Well, that's not what the New York Police Department, and probably I would put most of the blame on Alvin Bragg's DA's office in New York, thought, because Jose Alba was charged with second-degree murder. He was sent to Rikers Island, and the DA asked for a bond of $500,000. So the judge only put a $250,000 bond on him, which is still insane. So everyone found out about what unlawful restraint. Yes, I can't think of what it's called, but yeah, false imprisonment, that's what I was looking for. SMCG, you're all over it today. False imprisonment, that's the word I was looking for. Anyways, so the bond was reduced to $250,000. And everyone went crazy about it. Even the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, who is a former police officer but definitely leans, pretty progressive in a lot of his policies, he even went on TV and he said that that something like this, that workers and people should be able to be safe and they should be able to use reasonable self-defense. And Eric Adams, the mayor, he encouraged the DA to drop the charges. So after all of that happened, the bond was lowered to $50,000, and Jose Alba was able to bail out, but he was on an ankle monitor. There's also video of news reporters and people just bugging him at his apartment, and the guy's scared. He opens the door only a couple inches, and I mean, this is just a terrible thing for him. So in the last couple days, though, the DA dropped the charges. I'm going to use a couple negatives here, but this is the statement from the DA, that the DA could not prove that the force used was not self-defense. So the charges were dropped, which is a great thing. And John Bill's really good question. How do you think it would have went without a video? Well, I can tell you how it would go without a video. This would be looked at in the light most favorable to the guy who was dead. So I think if there wasn't a video, that I think Jose Alba, he would still be in trouble. There would still be charges pending. So yeah, I think that's exactly how that would have gone, and that would be a mischaracterization of justice. He should never have been in prison. He was in jail for 6 days, which is far too long. But it is good that the charges were dropped. Let's see if we have any other comments about this. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, I like the different camera angles. Yeah, no, I mean it's a great thing that there is surveillance there, and the public's the good thing about this is that the public support. Oh, okay, the public support was really for Jose Alba. I mean, there weren't a whole lot of people saying that had a lot of sympathy for Austin Simon. So what I worry about, though, is that imagine a situation. So all of the public support was with Jose Alba, and still he was charged, and still he spent 6 days in jail, and then longer on an ankle monitor. Imagine if the public support wasn't with him. What if the public support was with Austin Simon? Then this isn't how people should be prosecuted. It's just not how people should be prosecuted. It should be looked at with the evidence. And it's amazing to me that the DA's office and Alvin Bragg looked at the evidence and decided to charge second-degree murder in this case. I should also mention that after Jose Alba stabbed and killed Austin Simon, that the initial woman who had the issue with the chips, who called her man over, that she then stabbed Jose Alba as well. So he had injuries from that as well. And I think it'll be interesting to see if she is charged with the crime, because the last I heard, she had not been charged. Let's see. Okay. Someone talking about the new cop show coming out on Reel's channel. Yeah, so this was the live PD show that was on Dan Abrams. It was his show, and it was canceled in 2020 after all of the riots and after the George Floyd murder, and now it's rebranded. I think it's called something like On Patrol Live, and it is going to be on the Reels channel. They have camera crews with 30 different police departments around the country, and I think it's going to be on Fridays and Saturdays. So good plug there, because that is a great show for people who are interested and want to see what police officers. It's not scripted. It just calls for service. So of what police officers do on a regular basis. Milena says, what about the guy that was shot more than 60 times by the cops? Where were you a few minutes ago? So we covered that case, Milena. That was the Jalen Walker case. We did cover that. That was the first case I went through today, I think, and the police officers actually shot him 90 times, and he was hit 46 times. So we covered that in depth, so you can go back and watch this and see exactly what we say about that. And there were some good questions about that as well. So if anybody else has any other questions, I will definitely talk about them now. Otherwise, those were the cases that I thought were the most interesting cases to watch. So I just want to Remind everyone, Melina, sorry I was late. That's okay. Thank you for coming and commenting. I really appreciate it. But all of these lives, if you go into the Cop Watch TV channel and look at lives, you can watch it, and it'll be in the first 5 minutes or so, and you can see what we say about that case. It's probably the most interesting case with the most dynamic things going on in it. Okay. Wait, I have another one. Okay, Melina, I'll wait a second. All right, but yeah, while we're waiting for just a second, I want to remind everyone to make sure that you like and subscribe and follow Cop Watch TV, so that way we have people getting a public information request for body camera for the most interesting police interactions all around the country, not just officer-involved shootings. And then we kind of go over it every week, and we think what are the most interesting cases where people have the best questions. And also on these videos that we post on Cop Watch TV throughout the week, if you leave comments, because we definitely go through those comments and we look to see what kind of questions do people actually have about, these issues. And these are the kinds of things that we try to bring up here on our live. So, and again, my name is Daniel. You can go ahead and follow me on all social media channels at Police Law News, where I do daily content over there, and we will be live here every Friday. Last question is, what about the old lady that had dementia and was killed by a cop? Let's see. We will post that case. So I think we had body cam on that one that we posted a while ago, because that was in Las Cruces, New Mexico. So I think we covered that case as well. Maybe we can put a link to it. And I think I actually did like a body cam donut operator style review on that video. So yeah, if you go back through, we definitely cover that one in depth, more than almost any other case, because it is a pretty tragic case. So that's going to be it for us this week. I hope everybody has a good and safe weekend, and we will see you here on Cop Watch TV next Friday.